Hello. I'm trying the way I record for this class a little bit differently this time, so I hope you'll bear with me as I'm trying to figure everything out. I'm dressed red, white, and blue because yesterday was the traditional day for Memorial Day, May 31st. And of course, class is going to be held on Monday, June 1st. And I'm going to go backwards just a little bit. Usually I don't do that, but I think it's such an important holiday. And I know last Monday, the day that we celebrated it, we did not have class. So I would like to give you some facts, some interesting facts, 9 of them about Memorial Day. And this is for a regular Memorial Day. And then we'll talk about how everything is so different because of the COVID-19 crisis that we've been in. First of all, it is a very solemn day for military families. And I consider myself a military family. My father fought in World War II. My husband was in the Vietnam War. My daughter was in the Navy at the time of September 11th, and she was in Washington, D.C., close to the Pentagon, when the airplane hit it, that terrorists attacked it. And my oldest son was in the Army Reserves and got called up to Iran, and they had to go after Saddam Hussein. They were the first group to step over the line from Kuwait into Iran and to go over into that area and defeat him. So I do have a lot of military background. My son-in-law is also in the Army, and the one I like to call my adoptive stepdaughter, she was in the Air Force for 6 years. It's a very solemn time because we're remembering people who have died because of wartime experiences. But did you know that Memorial Day did not officially become a federal holiday until 1971? Now, I never knew that before. I just assumed there was always one because it did begin in May of 1868, and the holiday was around for a long time. General John A. Logan, the commander-in-chief of the Grand Army of the Republic, a Union veterans group, issued a decree that May 30th would be recognized as a day to commemorate over 620,000 soldiers killed in the Civil War. He called it Decoration Day. And that first year, 27 states adopted the holiday. By 1890, all the states that were in the Union at the time had declared it a state holiday. But for 50 years, it only commemorated the people who died during the Civil War. Now the date, this is the second big fact, the date of May 30th was chosen because it was a day that did not fall on a Civil War battle anniversary. Number 3, when Memorial Day was officially adopted as a federal holiday, the date was changed to the last Monday in May. And many veterans groups were concerned that the American public would be more interested in the fact that it's a 3-day weekend starting summer, and it would lose its original significance. They're still fighting to have the date changed back to May 30th, but I don't think that's going to happen. Number 4, one Memorial Day tradition is to have all flags fly at half-mast until noon and then raise to the top of the staff. The first part of the day honors those who have sacrificed their lives while serving. The second part of the day honors those military people who are still with us. In 2000, Congress passed the National Monument of Remembrance Act, and I don't think most people even remember that that happened 20 years ago. It requires all Americans to stop whatever we are doing at 3 o'clock and remember and honor those who have died serving their country. It's a 1-minute moment of remembrance. it is still recognized by many large companies to this day. When was the first Memorial Day celebrated, or where? That's really up for debate. Some people say Warrenton, Virginia. Some people say Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and also Savannah, Georgia. They all claim it. Why do people wear red poppies, which is a popular Memorial Day tradition? It's from a poem in Flandersfield written by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae in 1915, during the First World War. In 1924, faced with a shortage of poppies, the first artificial poppy factory was opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they employed out-of-work veterans. Very nice. One long-standing Memorial Day tradition to honor our late veterans and troops is to have a picnic on the grounds of a military cemetery. Well, let's talk about now. The fact is that this year, Memorial Day was very, very different. And that's because of the COVID-19, and so many of the states have been in quarantine. The concert on the Mall, which has been going on for about 20 years, lovely, lovely concert, features bands from all the different branches of the service, and the military heads of the different branches all are recognized. And then they have many of the veterans from World War II, where they have actors reenact their stories and acts of heroism. And well, this year, the announcers for the event did not film from the mall. No, they filmed in a studio located in our own state of California. They did have speeches and addresses from the different military leaders who spoke from their homes because they were under quarantine. And that includes Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, who usually says something every year. We also were not allowed to go to the graveyards and clean the graves. We almost did not get to decorate the graves because so many of the little American flags that we put on the veteran graves were still locked up in warehouses, and there was no transportation system, no way to get them out and get them to the cemeteries. But the president did enact some orders and got some of them out so that some of the cemeteries were decorated. Many patriotic speeches given by city, county, state officials were canceled, but most of the cities gave virtual, online tributes. I'd say about the only thing that was normal, somewhat normal, was that many families still had backyard picnics and barbecues, but nobody was allowed to have a large group. Up until May 31st in LA County, you were not allowed to have more than 10 people in a group. Now, the governor has given permission to the county supervisor, Janice Hahn, and this has also been happening in Orange County, where you live, and they can have up to 25 people. Or in a church service, they can now reopen if they have no more than 100 people in the service. So many of the larger congregations are still meeting out on these big church parking lots in cars. And I can see where people would be very safe sitting in their car because they've been parking at Walmart and Costco and Sam's Club and Target and many other big box stores for the whole 3 months. We've been in quarantine almost 3 months. Things are loosening up, and I'm happy to report that I get to get my hair done tomorrow. It's been a while since a beauty parlor's been open, so I'm happy about that. I'm looking forward to the day when you and I can get back together and have in-person meetings, and I can show you my artifacts, and we can do a lot of things that we were not able to do. I did want to say something about World War II. You know, last year we celebrated around this time the 75th anniversary of D-Day, which was in, I believe it was June 6th. I have a couple trivia questions for you. This is to get your mind in gear. During the war, the dashing British actor David Niven, remember him, the beautiful blonde hair, served as an officer and rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Which of the following served as his enlisted orderly? A. Michael Caine, B. Peter Ustinov, C. Alec Guinness, D. Trevor Howard. Well, if you guessed Peter Ustinov, you got it right. Okay, on November 1st, 1942, and a lot of you were alive then, while serving as a leader of a machine gun squad in Guadalcanal, Corporal Anthony J. Casamentos, U.S. Marines, came under heavy enemy fire near the Matanikau River. During the battle, all members of the unit were either killed or severely wounded. Despite his own multiple wounds, Corporal Casamento continued to provide supporting fire and heroically, by himself, held the enemy at bay, thereby protecting the flanks of adjoining companies until he was physically unable to continue. As a result, the President of the United States gave him the Medal of Honor, and that was on September 1st, but not till 1980. Why they waited 38 years, heaven only knows. Now, Adolf Hitler, who was in charge of Germany and the head of the Nazi Party, had two personal railroad trains. One was named Brandenburg. What was the name of the other one? A. America, B. Bismarck, C. Hindenburg, D. Ludendorff. That's one you have to think about. Two personal trains, the Brandenburg, and the other one was A. America. Anderson Shelter was which of the following? Anderson Shelter. A. A British general captured by the Germans in North Africa. B. An American fighter race serving with the Eagle Squadron before the U.S. entered the war officially. C. A spy for Germany who was tried and hung after being caught giving secrets to a British double agent. Or D. A British air raid shelter named after Sir John Anderson. It was D. A British air raid shelter that was named after him. Okay, and here's another one. Last one for today. Bella Russa was which of the following? This is for you World War II war buffs. Was Bella Russa a Soviet ship accidentally sunk by an American sub in May of 1943? Remember, they were our allies at the time. B, a female officer in the Soviet army who rose to the rank of full colonel. C, a female spy for Germany who was tried and hung after being caught giving secrets to a Soviet double agent. Or D, a female Soviet fighter race who scored 73 kills. Well, I'll tell you, it was not the last one because women were not allowed to be fighter pilots, not at the start of the war anyway. No, Bella Russa was a Soviet ship accidentally sunk by her allies, the Americans, an American sub in May of 1943. You know that most of the lives, or many of the lives that were lost during the First World War were lost to mustard gas. It also happened during the Second World War because when the German Luftwaffe blew up an American supply ship, much to their dismay, that American supply ship was loaded with mustard gas, and it took many lives during this World War II incident. Okay, so there are many, many other stories I could tell you, but for the sake of time, we don't have that much time. I do have a really good human interest story. I think I am going to share it and maybe keep some of my other stories for next week. I always prepare more for you than what we get through. I always do. I always try to be over-prepared so that you'll want me to come back, and I have more stories that I can share with you each time. Hopefully jog your memory and educate me, all right? This is called Growing Up in the Wake of World War II, and it's Childhood Recollections by Professor Benoit Roizen from the year 2000. But when we were growing up, he said it was the war, and we had to do without it. That was a phrase on my parents' lips when I was a small boy, growing up in rural Belgium. We were then in the late 50s and 60s, decades of plenty when people were getting better off each year, thinking it would never get bad again. Yet memories of the Second World War were still vivid in the 1950s and 60s. And my mother would recount how when they were teenagers during the years of 1940 to 45, my mother's family had been deported to the south of France in May of 1940 in a futile attempt to stay ahead of the Germans. They walked nearly 600 miles by foot, carrying suitcases and pushing her younger brother half asleep on his small scooter. And then she returned some months later, again by foot, another 600 miles, only to find the family house had been ransacked, and she lived through the rest of the war in fear of the Germans. My father, who spent the war years in Brussels, had tales of rationing and having to ride his bike to a distant farm where a cousin would be kind enough to give him bread, eggs, and butter in return for a whole day of helping around the farm. And as if the day of physical labor on the farm was not enough, the bicycle ride followed cobbled back roads on which the bumps often snapped the weak strings, the only strings one could find then, that held the precious cargo on the back rack of the bicycle, eggs, butter, and all, falling and breaking without mercy on the cobblestones. So it's really something for this professor and his siblings and their plush family house, surrounded by friendly neighbors and enjoying all kinds of commodities. Those stories seem to come from another world. If it had not been for all those physical traces of the great conflict around nearly every corner, the bombed-out building that had not yet been leveled, the temporary river bridge paralleling the old stone bridge with the missing middle arch, the armored tank still in the middle of the town square, and saddest of all, those acres and acres of white crosses in so-called American cemeteries. So when my parents recounted their stories, I knew it had been for real. And in my evening prayers, I would ask God to save me from having to live through such a war. And so it went. The bomb building to which we became indifferent would one day be demolished, reminding us that it had been bombed in the first place. My mother would reminisce about bombing raids in her hometown when all were warned by radios that they could come again at night. The windows had to be covered with black paper, lest lights be seen from the outside and betray the location of the town. At night, she and her siblings would spend the night trembling at every noise and every explosion nearby. So we started thinking later about the old tank on the town square. One day it got a fresh coat of paint. It looked as if the battle had been only yesterday. Stopping and scrutinizing it, I looked straight at it from the front. I could imagine it crawling toward me and shooting from its big barrel. On another trip, we stopped at a certain fork in the road. Nothing was peculiar about it, and I wondered why Dad stopped the car. Then he would tell us how the Americans were pushing the Germans back after the Battle of the Bulge. But through some circumstances, a group was pursued by the Germans, arriving at this intersection and went one way. And when the pursuing Germans arrived an hour later, they asked an old lady which way the Americans had gone. She pointed the other way. Her quick thinking and her courage saved precious lives. Such things, my father concluded, should never be forgotten. Once during winter, when all of us were assembled in the family room, my mother told us about the time when, before D-Day, some German officers had commandeered half of her family house. Each morning the soldiers would go to battle and return in the evening, saluting the family with arms stretched a la Hitler and snapping their boots, until one day they left, not to return. Barely a few days later, American officers took their turn in the house, and all had suddenly become a lot safer. Like the previous tenants, these men would leave in the morning and return in the evening, but they were extremely friendly, and their presence meant safety. Occasionally, one did not return, and the companions would simply say, "Oh, Jeff got hit and fell." Next day, someone else took Jeff's place. A life had been sacrificed, and for my mother, that was the life of someone with a name and pictures of his wife and kids and homeland in his pocket. The life of a cheerful fellow who had drawn funny little creatures in her diary. And somebody else who had taken her on his lap looked into her face and said she reminded him of his own daughter. Real people, with families just like my mother's and mine, have shed their blood on my native soil. If they had not done so, my country would have been prey to Nazism and later to communism. How could I go through life and not do something in return? What could I do to preserve the memory of these heroes? Although I was not there during the war and all my information is secondhand, I vowed I would never forget what I saw and what I heard. I vowed I would always carry a debt of gratitude that I knew I could never repay. I vowed I would say from the bottom of my heart to those who fought and survived, well done, and thank you. And I think I'm going to stop at this point. I do want to tell you that next week we will get into the month of June, but we could not go on without our own special memories of Memorial Day. And I wish I could be with you today and hear your many, many memories that you have. Some of you have fought in World War II. Most of you know that those people are fast leaving us. But you have memories also from the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and now the veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. So I want to say goodbye to you on somewhat of a solemn note, although I do want to tell you one really good thing. Yesterday also, May 31st, 2020, NASA partnered with the SpaceX group run by Elon Musk. We had the first successful launch of an American spaceship and a rocket, and it's amazing. They made it all the way to the International Space Station after the Dragon capsule successfully docked. They had a very, very emotional ceremony as they came into the station, which is now manned by the Russians. And then the first stage of the rocket, instead of falling back into the ocean, they were able to control where it went. And it came back and had a smooth landing on a barge in the Atlantic Ocean. And they will reuse this booster rocket many, many more times. Another good feature of the Dragon is that up to the last split second, if there was going to be an explosion or something go wrong, that the astronauts had a way of escape, and they could have ejected the capsule away from the exploding rocket and gone to safety, which is something that the space shuttle never did have. So it's been over a decade, and we want to congratulate those astronauts, and we look forward to more launches. The next one I think will be in August this summer. So till next time, bye everybody. I miss you, and I'll see you later.